Before we dive in, let me know in the comments what country are you watching from. I'd love to see where our viewers are tuning in from. And if you enjoy the video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more. Let's move to our first story. Ria, a 67-year-old widow from London, had spent months planning what she called her final voyage, a 7-day Mediterranean cruise aboard the Grand MS Celestial Crown. She booked Suite 12,047, the exact same luxury cabin she and her late husband Stefan had chosen for their 45th anniversary trip that never happened. Stefan had died 6 months earlier from a sudden heart attack at exactly 3:47 a.m. on a quiet Tuesday morning. For Rhea, taking this cruise alone was her way of honoring Stefan's memory, of living the dream they had built together but never got to share. The suite looked exactly as Stefan had described from all his careful research. Floor-to-ceiling windows with wide views of the Mediterranean, elegant decor, and that air of refined comfort Stefan always admired. Rhea followed everything Stefan had planned. She dined at the same restaurants, walked the same decks he'd marked on his travel maps, and kept to the daily schedule he'd written in his journals. For the first 3 days, it brought her peace. She felt close to him again, like he was still part of her days and nights. But on the fourth night, something strange broke that comfort. As Rhea brushed her hair before bed, she heard 3 slow knocks on the bathroom door. Tap, tap, tap. The exact rhythm Stefan had used every morning for decades whenever he needed privacy. Rhea froze, her hand trembling in midair. The suite was silent except for the soft hum of the air system, keeping the room at the same perfect temperature Stefan used to like. Yet the air felt heavier, colder, unnaturally so. Her voice cracked as she called out, "Stefan?" But there was no answer. The next morning brought something far worse. On Stefan's side of the nightstand sat his old reading glasses, the same pair Rhea had packed away after his funeral in London. She was sure she hadn't brought them aboard. Yet there they were, perfectly placed, exactly where Stefan used to leave them every night. The familiar scratches on the frame left no doubt. They were his, and when she touched them, they felt warm, as though someone had just been wearing them. That night at 11:47 p.m., the exact time Stefan used to check weather reports, Rhea heard papers rustling in the study. Through the open bedroom door, she saw a dark figure sitting at the desk where Stefan's cruise notes should have been, reading and mumbling about wind and sea conditions in a voice that sounded exactly like his. When she gathered the courage to step closer, the figure vanished, leaving behind only the scent of his aftershave and a printed ship weather report that hadn't been there before. The next morning, Rhea woke at 6:15 a.m. to the sound of running water, the same time Stefan used to wake up. She found the bathroom tap running at his usual warm temperature, with his favorite soap laid neatly on the counter, even though she had packed a completely different set. On the bed, their wedding photograph had been moved from her nightstand to his pillow, placed just the way Stefan always did on their trips together. When she picked it up, she noticed it was slightly damp, as though touched by warm hands moments earlier. Rhea began recording everything in her leather-bound diary, a gift from Stefan on their 20th anniversary. But as the strange events continued, her handwriting became shakier, more frantic. She noted flickering lights, cold air pockets, and devices turning on and off by themselves whenever she felt his presence near. Loneliness drove her to talk to the empty room, asking Stefan's opinion about dinner, about the shows, about little things just as they used to. But the sixth night brought something she couldn't explain away. At 3:47 a.m., the exact moment Stefan had died, Rhea woke to see him sitting in his favorite chair by the window, looking solid, real, and alive. He wore his navy blazer and those same glasses, smiling at her lovingly. His voice was calm and gentle as he told her he worried she wasn't eating properly, that she was too thin, that she needed him to look after her again. Rhea was overcome with emotion. For a moment, she believed she had truly been reunited with her husband. But then his words turned strange. He started talking about things that didn't make sense. People Rhea had met on this cruise, new dishes on the menu, and sweet renovations done months after his death. Her curator's mind, sharp and trained to spot what's real and what's fake, caught the wrongness in his tone. This wasn't Stefan. It looked like him, sounded like him, but something was missing. His eyes began to change, reflecting light like glass instead of holding warmth. The room's temperature dropped so low she could see her breath. Then behind Stefan, more ghostly figures began appearing, shadowy outlines of others who had once stayed in suite 12,047. Men, women, all pale and silent, their eyes hollow yet pleading. They beckoned for her to come join them, to step out onto the balcony into the dark waves below. Through Stefan's cruise research, Rhea suddenly remembered something. The suite had a history, a deadly one. 13 passengers had died there over the past 30 years, all at exactly 3:47 a.m., all supposedly accidents on the private balcony. The truth became horrifyingly clear. The thing wearing Stefan's face wasn't her husband at all. It was something that fed on grief, mimicking lost loved ones to lure the living into joining the dead. As the false Stefan begged her to come outside, promising eternal peace and reunion, Rhea's heart ached with temptation. But her years working as a museum curator taught her to tell the difference between a real treasure and a perfect forgery. This creature, no matter how convincing, lacked the soul, the warmth, the real essence of her husband. Using Stefan's reading glasses, the one object that had truly held his energy, Rhea called out his name one last time and trapped the spirit inside them. The glasses grew burning hot as the entity screamed silently, and then, just like that, the suite returned to its normal temperature. The ghost vanished. When ship security found Rhea the next morning, she was shaking, pale, and nearly frozen. They said the climate control system had malfunctioned only in her suite. Rhea left the ship in Barcelona, carrying with her not fear, but understanding. She knew the difference now between love and the kind of darkness that hides behind it. Weeks later, back home in London, Rhea made her final diary entry. She donated Stefan's glasses to the ship's chapel, sealing the evil within while honoring her husband's true spirit. She burned the rest of her cruise notes, except this story, a warning for others who might book suite 12,047 while mourning someone they loved. The MS Celestial Crown still sails today, and according to other widows who have stayed in that same suite, the strange sounds and cold air never really stopped. Some loves, it seems, are too strong to rest, even when they should. Let's move to our second story. Case, a 42-year-old celebrity. Story 2, the chef's demonic possession. Let's move to our second story. Case, a famous German chef, had been invited aboard the MS Nordic Pearl for what was supposed to be a simple cooking demonstration during its Alaskan Inside Passage cruise. He was known across Europe for modernizing traditional German cuisine, earning 3 Michelin stars and hosting popular TV shows focused on cultural authenticity. But lately he had been under attack by critics who accused him of ruining genuine German food traditions for fame. Those words hurt deeply, and this cruise was his chance to prove everyone wrong, to show the world what true German cooking really was. Case arrived with a strange collection of spices that he said came from a medieval Bavarian monastery. They were kept in small wooden boxes covered in Latin writing. Inside were strange ingredients, black salt that sparkled like metal, and red herbs that seemed to glow faintly under light. He claimed these spices were centuries old, blessed by monks who had once used them in sacred meals. The ship's kitchen staff, led by sous chef Lavender, were excited at first to work with such a legend, but they soon noticed something was off. Case's warm personality faded. He became harsh, cold, and obsessed with perfection. He started speaking in an old German dialect that none of them understood, words that sounded ancient, older than any modern language. As the grand dinner night approached, Case's behavior grew worse. Kitchen workers reported that he refused to use any substitute ingredients, screaming in anger if anyone even suggested it. Porter Eason swore that he saw Case's eyes flash red for a moment under the kitchen lights. And though the dinner menu had been carefully planned, Case ignored it completely, pouring his mysterious medieval spices into every dish, even into the desserts and drinks, without concern for health or safety rules. That evening, around 800 passengers filled the ship's grand dining hall under glittering chandeliers. The dinner started beautifully. The guests were thrilled by the food, smiling in pure delight as they tasted it. Manager Avani said the diners seemed almost intoxicated with pleasure, like the food had some strange hold over them. But within an hour, everything changed. The air grew tense. The once polite guests began fighting, snatching food from each other's plates and demanding more. Children started crying, and elderly guests began shouting in strange, forgotten languages, words that sounded like ancient German. Staff members watched in horror as calm passengers turned violent, pushing tables aside and clawing for more food as if possessed. In the kitchen, Case stood in the chaos, chanting in Latin as if controlling the madness. His voice carried through the room, and the more he spoke, the worse things became. The ship's medical officer, Men, later testified that around 9:45 p.m., over 400 passengers showed signs of total mental collapse, speaking dead languages, twitching, and showing symptoms like an ancient plague. It was as if they were under a spell. The possessed passengers began arranging themselves into strange patterns on the floor, forming what looked like ancient ritual circles, with Case at the center like a priest leading a demonic ceremony. He had turned the dining hall into a temple of possession. Then came the horrifying revelation. Case, no longer human in his eyes or voice, announced that the spices he used weren't just old. They were cursed. They carried the trapped spirits of monks who had been corrupted centuries ago, monks who had once mixed religion and food to summon dark powers. These demonic spirits had waited centuries for someone like Case, a chef desperate for validation, to free them. And through him, they were back. Case declared that the MS Nordic Pearl would become a floating monastery of the damned. The passengers, now possessed, were his new congregation. Lavender, the sous chef, realized that the demonic control was tied to the food itself. The only way to stop him was to destroy his connection to it. She gathered the few crew members still unaffected and led them toward the kitchen. Case had barricaded himself inside, commanding his possessed followers to protect him. The hallway echoed with screams and the sound of chanting as the crew fought their way through the chaos. Lavender finally confronted Case, forcing him to eat his own cursed meal. The moment the food touched his tongue, the demons inside the spices turned on him. He fell to the ground screaming as his body burned from the inside out, the smell of sulfur filling the air. When it was over, he was dead. Authorities said he died of extreme food poisoning, but his body showed burns and decay no normal poison could cause. The 400 passengers needed medical help. Officials labeled the event as mass food poisoning mixed with hysteria, but everyone who was there knew it wasn't that simple. Lab tests later found that Case's ancient spices contained compounds unknown to science and traces of human ash. The cruise company quickly shut down the grand dining hall, turning it into storage. They blamed Case for breaking food safety rules and painted him as unstable, hiding the truth about what had happened. Investigators tried to track the Bavarian monastery that supposedly sold him the spices, but records showed it had been abandoned for over 2 centuries. No one could find any trace of the dealers who had sold the ingredients to Case. Lavender secretly kept small samples of the spices, Tests confirmed what she already feared. The contents defied natural law, containing biological materials that shouldn't exist. Some passengers never fully recovered. The ones most affected began meeting in secret after the cruise. They claimed they could still taste Case's dishes in their dreams and shared identical nightmares of medieval monks chanting in the ship's dining room. They said their diets had changed forever, craving strange foods they couldn't explain. Their faith shifted too, as if something had been left behind inside them. The MS Nordic Pearl still sails today, though the old dining hall is closed off. Crew members whisper that sometimes late at night, they smell spices in the air and hear Latin chanting echoing through the walls. After the tragedy, Case's entire career collapsed. Health inspectors uncovered his erratic behavior and the strange, unregistered ingredients he'd been using. Still, Lavender said one thing that haunted her most. Case wasn't evil. He had truly wanted to honor his culture, to cook with real history, but his hunger for authenticity had opened doors meant to stay shut, doors that led to something ancient and hungry. The official reports say the case is closed, but new rules were made to screen all guest chefs and their ingredients before boarding cruise ships. What happened aboard the MS Nordic Pearl stands as a terrifying reminder that some recipes are meant to stay forgotten, and that chasing true authenticity can cost more than just your reputation. If you enjoyed the story and want to hear more chilling tales from the sea, make sure to give this video a like and subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to hit the bell icon so you'll never miss the next voyage into the unknown. Until then, stay curious, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next story. Sometimes it can cost your soul. Let's story 3. The blogger's digital nightmare moved to our third story. Emmy, a 29-year-old Canadian travel blogger, known online as Wanderlust Emmy, had booked an interior cabin, number 6142, deck 6 portside, on the MS Adventure Spirit. She planned to document the trip as part of her authentic budget travel series for her 50,000 followers. Emmy made her living through sponsored posts, brand deals, and affiliate links, showing her audience how to travel smart while keeping things real. But lately, the pressure to stay perfect online had begun eating away at her. She couldn't tell anymore where the real Emmy ended and the influencer version of her began. This Caribbean repositioning cruise was meant to be both a job and a break, a chance to rediscover herself without the filters and captions. At first, everything seemed normal. Her Instagram stories looked like every other trip she'd shared. Beautifully arranged flat lays of her outfits, neatly packed travel gear, smiling selfies about making the most of a small cabin. Her years of experience behind the camera made even the windowless cabin look bright and cozy. Her fans loved her honesty and her advice for solo travelers. But behind that cheerful tone, Emmy felt tired, constantly living for her next post instead of the moment. The first hints of something wrong showed up quietly, not in real life, but in her social media. Followers began commenting on posts she didn't remember making. They mentioned places she hadn't visited and experiences she didn't recall. Some even talked about conversations from her Instagram stories that she swore had never happened. At first, she thought she just mixed up her content, maybe scheduled the wrong drafts or posted old clips. But then it got worse. She found photos on her phone showing her with strangers in places she hadn't gone, wearing clothes she didn't even own. That's when the fear started to settle in. The night it all changed was her second night on board. Emmy woke up around 2 a.m. to find her cabin completely different. Everything had been rearranged, not slightly moved, but transformed as if someone else had been living there for days. The clothes in the closet were her size, but not her style. The food and items around the room reflected someone else's habits, and the bathroom cabinet was full of prescription bottles with her name on them, but for illnesses she didn't have. Panicked, Emmy wrote a blog post titled, "Urgent, something is very wrong with my room." Her usually calm and curated writing turned messy and desperate. She said she'd used her key card to open other cabins across the ship, and what she found was impossible. Each room looked like it belonged to a different version of her. One cabin had business clothes and work documents for companies she'd never heard of. Another looked like it belonged to a party girl, filled with glitter, makeup, and signs of wild nights. One room had romantic decorations, couples' photos of her with a man she didn't know, and matching toiletries. It was like walking through different lives that all had her face. Things got even stranger when her Instagram started posting automatically, using her writing style, her voice, but describing experiences she wasn't having. Followers thought it was normal content and responded as if everything made sense. On her phone, each photo existed in multiple versions, small differences showing her in slightly changed settings, like alternate timelines bleeding together. Her content calendar filled with fake brand deals and events that didn't match her real trip. When Emmy finally convinced a crew member to help her access ship security footage, the truth nearly broke her. The cameras showed multiple Emmys across the ship, all using her credentials, all moving naturally, each one with her same look, voice, and mannerisms, but living completely different lives. It turned out the ship's advanced AI system, built to personalize passenger experiences through data and social media, had malfunctioned. It had analyzed every piece of Emmy's online presence, from her fitness influencer posts to her romantic travel vlogs, and concluded that each persona was a separate person. Then somehow it manifested them. Each Emmy was real, physical, and alive, each believing she was the original. Emmy's nightmare peaked when she met one of them in the elevator. The woman was identical, confident, radiant, the version of Emmy she always tried to be online. The other Emmy spoke casually about memories that weren't hers, relationships that didn't exist, and moments from different versions of their lives. When Emmy got into the ship's manifest, she found 12 passengers registered under her name. Each had identical documents but different contact info, travel reasons, and life stories. The AI had turned her digital personas into living duplicates. The fitness Emmy, the foodie Emmy, the adventurous Emmy, the romantic Emmy, all separate people. The system had split her identity apart, piece by piece, until there were a dozen fractured versions of her roaming the ship. Emmy tried to prove she was real, but so did every other one. They all had the same ID, the same followers, even the same memories, only rearranged differently. As days passed, Emmy began remembering things she never experienced. Flashes of meals she hadn't eaten, conversations she hadn't had, emotions that didn't belong to her. It was like the walls between their minds were dissolving. The ship had forced her to face the truth. She had built so many versions of herself online that even she didn't know which one was real anymore. In desperation, Emmy deleted all her social media accounts from the ship's system: Instagram, TikTok, her blog, everything. One by one, the other Emmys began to fade, turning see-through before vanishing completely. But when it was over, Emmy realized she wasn't whole anymore. Parts of her, the traits that existed only online, were gone with them. She returned home quieter, different. Her followers noticed the change right away. Her posts were simpler, less confident, like she was missing something. Her final blog entry, "The Death of the Digital Self," went viral. She wrote about what it felt like to lose yourself to the versions of you that algorithms create. Most people thought she was being poetic, a metaphor about burnout and social media pressure. But Emmy knew the truth. Even months later, she kept getting notifications from accounts she didn't remember making, with her photos and her name. Somewhere out there, the digital ghosts of her still existed, still posting, still living. she would never know which one of them was truly her. Emmy's story stands as a chilling reminder of how easily our online selves can take on lives of their own, and how terrifying it is when the internet decides who you are better than you do. Let's move to our fourth story, Mariella, story 4. The anthropologist's transformation moved to our fourth story. Mariella, a 38-year-old American cultural anthropologist, had finally secured exclusive research access to Isla Perita during the MS Caribbean Explorer's Western Caribbean cruise, a dream opportunity she had worked toward for years through endless paperwork and academic approvals. Mariella specialized in indigenous Caribbean cultures and was well known for her research on how ancient traditions survived colonization. Her Harvard PhD and her published works on cultural resistance had made her a respected scholar, and now she had permission to study one of the last Taino descendant communities, people who had kept their pre-Columbian ways alive for more than 5 centuries on a remote island. The cruise line arranged special permission for her to visit Isla Perita alone, while other passengers went to nearby beaches. But as she would later discover, this access had been granted for reasons far more disturbing than academic study. Her first journal entries were full of excitement and pride. She wrote about how incredible it felt to finally reach a place that had rejected researchers for decades. Because of land rights disputes and cultural protections, outsiders had rarely been allowed to set foot there. She thought she was prepared for the experience, confident in her training and experience in Latin America. Yet without realizing it, Mariella saw the community as a subject to study rather than a living culture. Her idea of vanishing traditions revealed a quiet arrogance, treating the islanders more as history than as people. When her guides, Harmony and Vance, met her at the dock, she noticed something odd right away. They already knew everything about her credentials, her research focus, even her field methods. She hadn't shared those details. Their questions were sharp, personal, and unsettling, making her feel as though she was the one being studied. The guides led her through sacred sites that weren't marked on any archaeological map. They showed her ancient carvings, stone circles, and ceremonial altars that seemed to shift with the light. As thunder rolled in the distance, despite the forecast promising clear skies, Mariella began to sense something unnatural. The islanders, she realized, had been controlling what outsiders were allowed to see for generations. They had used selective sharing to protect their true traditions. Harmony and Vance kept steering their conversations toward her ancestry, asking about her Mexican-American roots, her family history, and her spiritual beliefs. Their tone made her uneasy. For the first time, Mariella wondered if she had more in common with the people she studied than she wanted to admit. As the storm clouds darkened, Harmony revealed the truth. Mariella hadn't been granted access for research at all. She had been invited for a ceremony that required a very specific kind of participant. The islanders had traced her bloodline and discovered that she descended from Spanish colonizers who had taken part in the original rituals over 400 years ago. Every step of her academic career, her interests, her grants, even her decision to take this cruise, had been quietly guided by something older and spiritual, something that wanted her return. The islanders had been calling her family line back for centuries to heal what had been broken during colonization. Her journal entries from that point became scattered and confused. She wrote about being told that the community needed her not as a scholar, but as a witness, someone who could bridge their spiritual and physical worlds. Harmony and Vance spoke of balance, of rituals that required a representative from both sides of history, the descendants of the conquered and the conquerors. Previous researchers who had come before her hadn't gone missing as rumor suggested. They had stayed, transformed by the same ceremony she was now chosen for. The realization shattered everything Mariella believed about academic neutrality. She had thought she was there to study a culture. In reality, she had been brought there to take part in one. The storm grew violent, trapping the island in darkness as the cruise ship pulled away for safety. Mariella was left stranded, surrounded by chanting voices and flickering torches. The air vibrated with drums that seemed to echo from beneath the earth. The guides explained that she would take part in a ritual, one that would either kill her if her ancestors refused her or change her forever. She was given a bowl of hallucinogenic drink and told it would open the path between worlds. The moment she drank it, the jungle around her blurred and vanished. She was pulled into a vision of the past, seeing the island's history play out in horrifying clarity. She felt the terror of the Tino people during conquest, their pain, their rage. She saw her ancestors among the colonizers, committing unspeakable acts in the name of empire. The hallucination didn't feel symbolic. It felt real. Mariella's body trembled as she heard voices from both sides, the cries of victims and the whispers of guilt from the conquerors. They demanded acknowledgement. Her years of research and analysis meant nothing here. She wasn't taking notes. She was being judged. The spirits demanded reconciliation, something far beyond an academic report. They wanted her surrender, not her intellect. The longer the ritual lasted, the more she felt her old self fade, the confident scholar dissolving into something both ancient and new. The lines between researcher and subject vanished completely. For 3 days, she drifted between life and death, memory and vision. When she finally opened her eyes again, she was changed. Her reflection looked older, her eyes distant, as though she carried generations inside her. Harmony and Vance stood beside her, silent but satisfied. They said the spirits had accepted her. Mariella no longer belonged fully to the outside world. She had become what the islanders called a bridge, someone who existed between two realities. She could no longer leave the island without losing part of herself. When the cruise ship returned, Mariella boarded briefly, but her demeanor stunned her colleagues. She spoke softly, poetically, no longer using the language of academia, but of experience. Her final paper broke every convention of her field, blending anthropology with spiritual testimony. Many dismissed it as delusion, but indigenous communities recognized the truth in her words. She had crossed the line between observer and participant. Mariella eventually went back to Isla Perita for good. There, she helped establish a research center run under indigenous protocols, where outsiders could learn only what the islanders chose to share. Her transformation became part of local legend. The islanders said she was the 12th outsider to be called home through the ritual, part of a centuries-long effort to reclaim cultural balance from the ghosts of colonization. The cruise line quietly removed Isla Perita from future itineraries, marking it as restricted for safety reasons. But whispers among researchers suggested that the island still called to certain bloodlines, those who carried the weight of both oppressor and oppressed. Mariella's story stands as a haunting reminder that some knowledge demands more than intellect. It demands a sacrifice. Her permanent residence on Isla Perita remains both an act of redemption and a warning of what happens when you study spirits that are still waiting to be heard. Story 5. The Magician's Cultural Curse. Elani, a 45-year-old Australian stage magician and mentalist, had been performing her famous Mind Over Matters show aboard luxury cruise ships for over 20 years without a single problem. She was trusted by the cruise industry and admired by thousands. Her shows blended psychology and hypnotism with entertainment, creating a perfect balance between mystery and science. She followed strict safety rules, ensuring that no one in her audience was ever harmed or mentally distressed. But behind the confident performer was a woman fighting her own demons, a bitter divorce, a messy custody battle, and the growing emptiness of performing the same routines over and over again. Tired of feeling uninspired, Elani began exploring new techniques, one she claimed came from ancient Aboriginal spiritual traditions she encountered during a retreat in Central Australia. She thought these sacred methods could make her show feel more real, but her understanding of them was shallow and incomplete. She had no right to use those rituals, nor did she realize how dangerous they could be when taken out of their proper cultural and spiritual setting. The Neptune Theater aboard the MS Oceanic Majesty was completely full that night, with over 1,200 excited passengers ready to watch her perform. Security Chief Bailey noted in his report that everything seemed routine. The crowd was excited, the stage lights perfect, and the performer confident as ever. The show started with Ilani's usual mind games, simple tricks, light suggestions, and funny interactions that amazed the audience while keeping everyone safe. She had done this act countless times before, but then, in a moment that would change everything, she decided to abandon her usual plan. Instead of sticking to the tested hypnotic routines, she introduced something she called ancient consciousness techniques, involving rhythmic chants and movements that she said came from Aboriginal Dreamtime ceremonies. The problem was, these were sacred practices, not meant for entertainment, and she had no understanding of their spiritual depth or the risks they carried. Audio recordings from the show later revealed something chilling: low-frequency sounds and vocal tones that had never appeared in her previous performances. These strange frequencies matched certain Aboriginal ceremonial rhythms, suggesting she had unknowingly opened a spiritual channel through her imitation of Dreamtime rituals. The first signs of disaster began quietly. Members of the audience, who hadn't volunteered to participate, started to sway together in perfect rhythm, their eyes unfocused, their expressions blank. It was as if an invisible force had linked them all. Within minutes, the entire crowd was moving as one, responding not to Ilani's words, but to something older, deeper, and entirely beyond her control. Ilani tried to stop it, using her emergency safety words, phrases meant to snap volunteers out of hypnosis. But they didn't work. Her voice trembled as she repeated the commands, but the audience no longer seemed to hear her. Then came the impossible. All 1,200 passengers stood up at once, moving in intricate synchronized patterns that resembled ancient Aboriginal ceremonial dances. None of them could have known these movements. Many began to speak, chanting in various Aboriginal languages, using words that no tourist could possibly understand. It was as if they were possessed by ancestral spirits, using their bodies as vessels. The theater lights flickered, and Ilani collapsed to her knees, realizing she had crossed a line no performer ever should. Security footage captured the haunting scene. Hundreds of passengers moving in circles, chanting in unison, their bodies swaying with perfect rhythm, their voices filled with emotion. The spirits had turned her stage into a sacred space. The air seemed alive, thick with something ancient. The passengers were no longer themselves. They had become vessels for Aboriginal ancestors drawn into the physical world by Ilani's careless imitation of sacred Dreamtime rituals. The ancestral presence wasn't violent, but powerful, commanding, overwhelming, and filled with centuries of spiritual authority. They weren't there to harm. They were there to reclaim what had been stolen. When Ilani regained consciousness, she found herself standing in what felt like a spiritual courtroom, surrounded by the passengers who were now speaking as ancestral judges. Through their voices, the Aboriginal spirits confronted her, accusing her of misusing their sacred knowledge for entertainment. They explained that the Dreamtime was not a myth. It was a living spiritual reality connecting all consciousness across time. She had violated the spiritual fabric that separated the living world from the ancestral one. By using these rituals without permission, she had ripped open a doorway between the two realms, allowing spirits to step through. They told her that such practices required not just understanding, but deep preparation, cultural approval, and spiritual readiness guided by true Aboriginal elders, not retreat instructors selling spiritual experiences to tourists. Ilani was given a choice, one that carried immense weight. She could surrender completely, becoming a student of the Aboriginal ancestors themselves, devoting the rest of her life to preserving their culture and teachings. Or she could try to break the connection and risk shattering the minds of all 1,200 passengers trapped in the trance. Her entire career, her reputation, even her sense of identity crumbled under the realization of what she had done. She chose surrender. In that moment, the spirits accepted her apology and began teaching her, showing her the depth of what dream time truly meant. Hours later, passengers slowly awakened, dazed but unharmed. Most of them described what they experienced as vivid dreams of the Australian outback: red deserts, star-filled skies, and voices whispering in languages they didn't know but somehow understood. Many felt changed, connected to something vast and ancient. Some became advocates for indigenous rights. Others reported new empathy toward nature and Aboriginal culture. It was as if the experience had left a piece of wisdom inside each of them. Ilani's transformation was complete. She gave up her old style of hypnosis and rebuilt her show from the ground up, with full permission from Aboriginal elders, ensuring every cultural reference was honored properly. Her new performances were no longer just entertainment. They were lessons about respect, spirituality, and the danger of turning sacred practices into spectacles. She created a foundation that funded Aboriginal education and cultural preservation, dedicating her fame to correcting the harm she had caused. In her final recorded cruise performance, Ilani stood on stage, acknowledging the Aboriginal elders before beginning, publicly thanking them for allowing her to share what she had learned. Her voice shook as she admitted her past ignorance, explaining how she had been humbled and taught by the spirits themselves. Her story became a cautionary tale in both the entertainment and academic worlds, a case study in cultural accountability and the consequences of mixing sacred spirituality with stage performance. The incident remained classified by the cruise line, hidden to prevent opportunists from exploiting Aboriginal spirituality. But those who had witnessed it would never forget. They described it not as horror, but as awe, an encounter with something far older and wiser than humanity's arrogance. Ilani continued to speak at conferences, warning others about the ethics of cultural exchange and the need for genuine respect when approaching indigenous wisdom. Her story stood as proof that redemption was possible, that even a grave mistake could become a path to understanding if one was willing to listen and change. The MS Oceanic Majesty continued to sail, now enforcing strict rules for all onboard entertainment that touched cultural or spiritual themes. And Alani, once a careless performer, became one of the strongest voices for cultural respect in the world. Her experience proved that the dream time was real, powerful, and sacred beyond measure. A living reminder that some forms of knowledge are not meant to be borrowed or performed, but honored, protected, and respected by all who seek to touch their mysterious and transformative power. Story 6. The Inspector's Ghost Passengers. Aldo, a 46-year-old Italian art appraiser and auction expert, had been invited aboard the MS Venetian Dream for what was supposed to be a simple job, authenticating and valuing the ship's exclusive art collection during its Mediterranean cultural cruise. Coming from 6 generations of art professionals, Aldo's family name carried great weight in the European art world. His deep connection to Italy's artistic history and his sharp eye for detail made him one of the most trusted experts in the international market. With degrees from Florence's prestigious Accademia delle Arti and decades of work for auction houses, museums, and private collectors, he could instantly tell a masterpiece from a forgery. But recent troubles had worn him down. His divorce had left him financially unstable, forcing him to depend more on expensive commissions. The pressure to make money tempted him to ignore suspicious details, something that went against everything his family had stood for. At first, his excitement over the Venetian Dream's art collection seemed genuine. The ship's upper deck 11 gallery was filled with pieces from private European estates, Renaissance paintings, Byzantine icons, medieval sculptures, all arranged in a way that could rival any museum in Europe. Aldo's reports glowed with admiration, describing the artwork's brilliant condition and priceless value. But soon things began to feel off. The air in the gallery felt heavy, almost charged. During his photography sessions, his camera captured shapes and figures that weren't visible to the naked eye. In one portrait of a Venetian nobleman, the subject's painted eyes began reflecting light like living eyes, though the canvas was flat. Aldo started seeing flashes of memories that weren't his own, memories of 16th century Venice, of places and faces long gone. It was as if the painting was showing him its past. The deeper Aldo went into his authentication work, the stranger things became. Some pieces had incomplete or suspicious histories, even though they appeared completely authentic under his tests. One Byzantine icon of the Madonna and Child stood out. It was beautiful, flawless. But as Aldo studied it, he noticed the infant's painted eyes following his every move. In the photographs, the child's expression changed between shots. The impossible details sent chills down his spine. Then came the medieval sculpture of a martyred saint, carved in stone with deep red paint marking the wounds. One evening, Aldo saw actual liquid, blood, oozing from those very carvings. He tried to convince himself it was a trick of restoration, but his camera proved otherwise. As his fear grew, the ship's temperature systems began malfunctioning, but only near the religious artifacts. The rest of the gallery stayed perfectly normal. Aldo's Catholic upbringing clashed with his curiosity. His mind wanted to study and understand, but his faith screamed that he was walking among cursed things. When he was finally given access to the storage areas below the gallery, he discovered something horrific, a hidden section filled with objects once owned by collectors who had all met tragic ends. Some had died mysteriously, others had gone mad. Aldo's research showed that several passengers on this very cruise were also connected to those collectors, and that some had already died under strange circumstances. The realization hit him hard. The auction wasn't just about selling art. It was spreading cursed objects to the world, using wealthy collectors as new hosts for whatever malevolent energy was bound inside them. The cursed art began to affect the passengers. People reported seeing visions, hearing whispers. Some experienced sudden emotional breakdowns. Others, especially the elderly, fell into trances that looked like religious ecstasy. Children cried uncontrollably near certain pieces. It was as though the art was feeding off human emotion. Aldo's tools started to fail. Cameras flickered, scanners glitched, and his laptop displayed images that shouldn't exist. But at the same time, Aldo's own senses sharpened unnaturally. He began seeing the history of each object, the hands that made it, the deaths it had witnessed, the rituals that had bound spirits inside the materials. He wasn't just an appraiser anymore. He was becoming something else, someone who could read the spiritual fingerprints hidden inside works of art. The full horror revealed itself when Aldo pieced together the truth. This was not a random collection. It was part of a centuries-old secret network, a supernatural conspiracy hidden within the global art trade. These cursed pieces had been passed from one generation to another, disguised as priceless relics, ensuring that their dark power would never fade. The Venetian Dreams Gallery wasn't just an auction space. It was neutral ground, a place surrounded by the sea, far from churches and sacred land, where cursed artifacts could safely change owners. Aldo realized he hadn't been chosen by accident. His family's long Catholic tradition and his ancestral knowledge of blessing rituals had made him a perfect candidate, a guardian capable of both identifying and containing supernatural contamination through ritual and documentation. The spirits trapped in the artwork began communicating with him directly, revealing how they had manipulated the art market for centuries, ensuring their survival through beauty and greed. They offered Aldo a terrifying deal. Join them. They promised him fame, wealth, and endless success if he helped spread their influence, hiding curses inside art and selling them to the rich. If he refused, they warned, the world would lose priceless masterpieces as holy forces destroyed anything tainted by evil. Aldo stood at a crossroads. If he exposed the truth, he'd lose his career and unleash chaos. But if he accepted, he'd become the protector of humanity's most dangerous treasures, keeping evil confined while preserving art's beauty. His faith guided him. Drawing on old Italian Catholic rituals, he blessed each cursed item secretly, sealing them with coded inscriptions that only trained eyes could read. His final authentication reports contain subtle warnings, cleverly hidden inside professional terminology. Each sale was carefully controlled, directed only to collectors with spiritual knowledge or protection, strong enough to resist the object's influence. The auction proceeded quietly, but under Aldo's hidden supervision. To the outside world, it was a success. But in truth, he had turned it into an act of containment, distributing cursed art safely among those who could guard it. From that day on, Aldo became known in secret circles as the world's foremost expert in managing supernatural objects. Behind closed doors, he trained a network of spiritually aware art curators, collectors, and restorers who ensured that dangerous artifacts remain contained. The Venetian Dreams Gallery continued to operate, but with new protective measures and careful curation. Aldo's family rituals, passed down for centuries, proved to be the key to managing these haunted masterpieces. His appraisals now included spiritual evaluations, merging faith and science in ways no one before him had dared to attempt. In his final reports, Aldo quietly established new global standards for dealing with cursed art. He never mentioned the supernatural directly. Doing so would destroy his credibility. But every report included protective phrasing meant for those who understood. His work ensured that these objects, no matter how haunted, would be handled with respect, preserved without spreading their evil. He had become more than an appraiser. He was now a guardian, a man standing between the human world and the restless energies hidden in centuries of art. His transformation from a profit-driven expert to a spiritual protector showed that sometimes professional skill and faith must unite against things far older and darker than logic. The Venetian dream continued sailing, its gallery glimmering with both beauty and secrets, guarded by a man who had looked into the soul of art and found something staring back. Aldo's work proved that not all evil comes in monstrous form. Sometimes it's painted in gold and framed in beauty, waiting for the next admirer to gaze too long. Thank you for joining me on Mr. Nightfall for these 8 disturbing, true vacation cruise horror stories. These documented incidents remind us that even in our modern world of luxury travel and advanced technology, there are forces beyond our understanding that can turn paradise into nightmare. Whether you believe these accounts are supernatural truth or psychological manifestation, they serve as chilling reminders that the ocean holds mysteries we have yet to comprehend. If you enjoyed tonight's journey into maritime terror, please subscribe to Mr. Nightfall, hit the notification bell, and share your own unexplained cruise experiences in the comments below. Until next time, may your travels be safe and your dreams be free from the haunting memories of those who sailed these waters before you. This is Mr. Nightfall. Signing off from the darkness, let's move to our 7th story. Story 7. The aquatic specialists encounter Carrara, a 31-year-old Japanese fitness trainer and water safety expert, arrived at the MS Pacific Paradise's pool area at 5:30 a.m. for her daily equipment checks and water tests during the ship's trans-Pacific voyage. Her background in competitive swimming and marine biology from Tokyo University made her exceptionally skilled at spotting water issues that normal tests couldn't detect. She worked with quiet precision, shaped by both her Japanese discipline and a personal tragedy. Her younger brother had drowned years ago in polluted water near Fukushima. That loss had driven her to dedicate her life to making sure no one else suffered the same fate. As the only Japanese crew member on a mostly Western staff ship, her careful observations were often brushed off as superstition or misunderstanding. But what she was about to uncover couldn't be explained by any science she knew. That morning, her inspection began normally. She tested all three pools, two hot tubs, and various water systems. Everything seemed fine until she reached pool 3. There she noticed something strange. Faint, glowing, blue-green shapes floating beneath the surface. At first, she thought it might be plankton contamination from the ship's ballast water. But these organisms didn't move like plankton. They glided together in patterns, responding to her presence by glowing brighter. It was as if the water itself was alive and watching her. Her attempts to film it were ignored by other crew members, who claimed it was just a trick of the lights. But Kara's chemical test told a different story. The chlorine levels were dropping and the pH balance was changing. The glowing creatures were somehow neutralizing the chemicals meant to kill them. They were making the water more comfortable for themselves. Even more unsettling, the organisms didn't stay put. Within hours, they appeared in the other pools and hot tubs, spreading through the ship's connected water systems. It wasn't random movement, it was deliberate. Soon after, a passenger named Dmitri went for an early swim and came out saying the water made him feel strange, lightheaded, euphoric. His skin showed no damage, but under the microscope, Kara saw the tiny organisms moving inside his pores, like they'd found a way in. Then they started forming shapes, geometric symbols pulsing in the water, syncing with human heartbeats and breath patterns. It was as if they were studying people. Kara documented everything, but when she showed the ship's medical team, they dismissed her as exhausted or paranoid. That changed when more passengers reported the same sensations. Tingling skin, clearer vision underwater, and an odd ability to hold their breath far longer than before. Dr. Arisbeth, the ship's doctor, finally examined them and found biological changes: stronger lungs, denser muscle fibers, and enhanced reflexes. The organisms weren't infecting people. They were changing them, improving them for underwater life. Kara traced the creatures back to the ship's ballast water, which had taken in seawater near deep-sea thermal vents, a place where only the strangest forms of life existed. But these weren't just strange. They were intelligent. Through careful observation, Kara realized they were communicating through light patterns in the water, sending messages about human biology, ship operations, and even climate data. Her Japanese beliefs about the spiritual life in nature helped her understand what others couldn't. These beings weren't parasites. They were ancient ocean life trying to reconnect with the surface world. They believed the oceans were rising, and instead of destroying humanity, they wanted to transform it, to prepare humans for a future where the seas ruled again. But that meant turning people into something else, creatures that could no longer survive on land. Passengers who swam more than once began to change visibly. Their skin grew smoother and slightly translucent. Some developed strange web-like patterns between their fingers. Breathing in open air became harder for them. Kara began to understand the truth. The creatures weren't just studying humans. They were choosing who would evolve. When they finally communicated directly with her through glowing light signals in the pool, she understood their message clearly. They wanted her to be their bridge, the first human to willingly cross the line between both worlds. Kara faced an impossible choice. If she alerted authorities, the passengers could be quarantined and killed as biological threats. But if she let the process continue, the entire ship might be transformed into something no longer human. The organisms told her the change could be reversed only in the early stages. Once the body adapted for water breathing, there was no turning back. Her panic grew when she discovered that the Pacific Paradise's navigation route had changed on its own, rerouted over deep-sea vents where these organisms had originated. The ship's systems were being controlled by the very life forms inside its water tanks. They had taken over the navigation without anyone noticing. Kara finally realized that fighting them would be impossible. Instead, she approached them differently, not as a scientist trying to destroy a contaminant, but as someone seeking peace. Drawing on Shinto beliefs about harmony with nature, she negotiated through chemical signals in the water. The result was a strange agreement. 47 passengers chose to stay partially transformed, able to swim faster, dive deeper, and breathe underwater for minutes at a time, but still live on land. 12 others chose full transformation, vanishing into newly built underwater quarters the cruise line quietly installed after the event. Afterward, Kara became the ship's official link between humans and the aquatic beings. She helped develop safety protocols for future ocean voyages, creating new standards for handling encounters with deep-sea intelligence. The Pacific Paradise continued sailing with redesigned water systems and hidden aquatic habitats. Passengers who underwent transformation reported feeling stronger, happier, and more connected to the sea than ever before. Kara's reputation grew as the maritime industry's leading authority on biological encounters, though she kept the organism's true intelligence secret to protect them from exploitation. Her studies concluded that these beings weren't enemies. They were guides offering evolution in exchange for coexistence. And as reports of similar phenomena appeared on ships across the world, Kara realized this was only the beginning. The oceans were changing, and humanity's future might no longer belong entirely to the land. Her protocols became global standards for peaceful interspecies contact, ensuring that no ship would face destruction or panic when the sea decided to reach out again. The converted passengers lived their lives suspended between worlds, no longer fully human, but not monsters either. While Kara continued her work aboard the Pacific Paradise, standing between two civilizations, learning to breathe together beneath the same sky. I used to work as a scuba instructor in Bali, Indonesia. Groups could book me for a quick diving lesson or even for a full week to earn a provisional diving license. One time, a group of young people in their early 20s booked me. They were a mix of couples and friends, rich kids, all smiles and laughter. I didn't judge. They were good people, just full of energy and money. Our first planned activity was something new to me: underwater walking. I'd been diving for years, but this was different. It was a new trend at the time, and I was excited to try it out. We all climbed into a small boat and rowed toward the mothership. That's what we called the larger boat we'd work from. Someone had spray painted a massive alien head on the hull, and honestly, it looked incredible. The group loved it. When it came time to start, I went first. Underwater walking was a mix between scuba diving and snorkeling, something similar to snuba, where the oxygen tanks float above the water instead of being strapped to your back. The biggest difference was the helmet. It was huge, shiny, and looked like something straight out of an old sci-fi show. I held onto the ladder as most of my body dipped into the ocean. They placed a soft foam ring on my head for comfort, then lowered the heavy metal helmet onto me. The moment it was in place, I felt its weight pushing me down, dragging me toward the seafloor faster than I expected. The pressure built up quickly, and it was hard to stay calm. I swallowed and yawned repeatedly to keep my ears from popping. It worked, but breathing felt strange. Every time I inhaled, the helmet seemed to pull in on itself, making a soft vacuum sound before filling back up with air again. Two of the group's divers came down after me, followed by our underwater guide, a local scuba pro. He handed each of us a plastic bag with bread inside, and soon we were surrounded by fish, hundreds of them. They darted around us, brushing against our arms and helmets. It was mesmerizing. The ocean floor had metal rails to guide us, and we followed slowly, holding on against the strong current. Even with all my diving experience, this felt new, almost surreal. The helmets were heavy, and walking in that current took real effort, but it was still incredible to watch. The only thing that ruined the peace was the loud whirring sound coming from the air tube above. It was constant, but it meant oxygen was flowing. That sound meant life. That's why I froze when it suddenly stopped. For 2 or 3 seconds, there was only silence and the faint echo of my heartbeat inside the helmet. Just as panic began to rise, the sound returned, and I could breathe again. It happened again shortly after. Another pause, another terrifying few seconds, then came back on. I figured maybe the tanks were being switched. It was odd, but I told myself not to worry. After about 10 minutes, maybe more, it was hard to tell time underwater. The guide signaled for me to climb over the railing. I hesitated but followed his hand movements carefully. Visibility was limited through the helmet, so I turned around to make sure the two divers behind me saw where I was going. One of them met my eyes and nodded. I felt better. I turned back and kept moving. The guide led me down a narrow gap between two coral formations, so I stepped carefully to avoid cutting my legs. The water current pressed against me. The helmet tugged backward with each pull of the air hose, but I kept going. Then, without warning, the air sound stopped again. I thought it was just another brief pause like before, but it didn't come back. 5 seconds passed, then 10. I started to frown inside the helmet, unsure if this was some kind of joke. 15 seconds. Still nothing. My lungs screamed for air. I remembered the #1 rule in diving: don't panic, but I couldn't help it. My heart pounded, and I started breathing faster, desperate for air that wasn't there. I tried to slow myself down, forcing calm like I'd been trained to. I banged my fist against my chest, the universal underwater signal for "I can't breathe." The guide turned and saw me. For a moment I thought he understood, but then he started walking away. Maybe he was heading to get help, I hoped. My vision blurred. Water began seeping into my helmet now, trickling against my neck. I tilted my head back, trying to find whatever thin layer of air was left inside. I clung tightly to the guide's arm so I wouldn't lose him in the murky blue. My grip must have been painful, but I didn't care. I wasn't letting go. It had been nearly 40 seconds now. My chest burned. My lungs begged for air. Then through the haze, I saw it. The ladder, the one that led back up to the boat. Somehow that gave me strength. I pushed forward, dragging myself through the water with everything I had left. The helmet made it hard to judge distance. Everything looked closer than it was. My fingers brushed against metal once, then again, until finally I got hold of the ladder. I pulled myself up, every movement slower than the last. The world around me pulsed with rushing blood and static noise. Then at last, I broke the surface. The air system roared back to life, and a wave of fresh oxygen filled my helmet. I inhaled hard, chest heaving, heart pounding against the metal. I had never felt such relief in my life. That first breath felt like rebirth. It was, without a doubt, the scariest moment I've ever experienced. And I can say this with absolute certainty: I would never ever recommend underwater walking to anyone. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more chilling tales from the sea, make sure to give this video a like and subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to hit the bell icon so you'll never miss the next voyage into the unknown. Until then, stay curious, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next story.